country without any models.
So you started by saying parents don't want to experiment with their children,
No.
but this is a
Big,
pretty grand
big
experiment.
experiment. Yes, a big experiment. And
But then how do we get, when you say the parents should be able to choose, then how do we get to standards? Why won't we just be standards all across the board?
we have the standard of the SAT. We have the standards of what we call quality control, reputation. That's how we have standards in the United States. This school is reputed to be this. And how do you do that? By the results.
But is public school, is that sort of a one-size-fits-all? Or
No, no. In a public school, it's a very interesting phenomenon. In public school, there are two groups that they emphasize: learning disabled, bottom 10%, and the really motivated, intelligent students at the top 10%. They get all the attention. The middle group, which is most of the United States, nobody cares. So you can get a superb qualitative education in a public school if you're motivated and you're talented. If you don't do the work, you go back down to the mass.
Okay.
And they're the ones that survive, but they put their money into that and money into learning disabled.
So how does the public school system narrow that gap so more students are getting a better education?
They want to do that, but again, it's a cultural question. It's a talent question and a cultural question.
Okay.
What is the cultural matrix that these kids come from? And as you say, the Asians, the Jewish community. They're
Motivated.
Motivated.
Well, I want to shift gears a bit because the Common Core, federally mandated, with that comes a boatload of money.
Right?
You have to use this if you want the money.
Right.
Kellenberg, you use Common Core?
No.
Okay. So first of all, no money coming from the federal government to Kellenberg.
Anyway, that's right.
But you have a problem with the methodology in any event with Common Core. Tell me about Kellenberg. What's the methodology? What's going?
Okay. The methodology is, we're basically classical. We go back to the Greeks, the trivium and the quadrivium.
What does that mean?
The trivium says whenever the learning process, there are three stages. It's called the grammar stage, the analytic stage, and the rhetorical stage. What do you mean by that? First of all, you got to memorize the grammar stage. You got to memorize the terms.
And you're not necessarily meaning literally language arts grammar. You mean grammar across the board.
Yeah, I don't mean language arts. Grammar is the fundamental aspects of this science.
Okay.
You got to memorize that. Now, our current educational process, memorization is, oh, that's rote, that's inhuman.
That's not critical thinking.
That's correct.
But you can't get to the critical thinking until you master the...
Exactly right.
Okay.
It's like a doctor. You want a doctor who has good judgment. He has a medical judgment. Now, how did he get that judgment? He didn't get it the first day of college or kindergarten. He got it through a rigorous grammar stage, analytic stage, rhetorical stage. Now, the analytic stage is where you can put these two words together and make some sense. The rhetorical is where you can now discourse on this subject fruitfully. Those are three steps. You can telescope that. You can give them critical reading rhetoric in kindergarten. They have to start out just learning words, phrases, getting them to write a good sentence.
Math concepts.
Math
facts.
Facts and skills. Skills.
Any way to get through the times table without memorization? Because let me know, because I missed that one.
No, I mean, those are arithmetic skills. Fractions, decimals, you master them to the second nature. You come to algebra, factoring, you master it, so it's second nature.
So the concept, if I have it, Father, the mastery, what we're trying to teach the children to do is to master these basics. So whatever they choose to do, they now know the process. You know,
They know the process.
by the time they should be, when they're finished with high school, having gone through, you know, math, algebra, chemistry, language
Right.
arts, a language, they've learned to memorize, to master things. So if they decide to go on to be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer or an English teacher, they know the process of how to get trained in it.
That's correct. And that's what the trivium, quadrivium, the trivium is. It's a process.
You've been at it teaching, I guess, almost 60 years. Do you still teach?
I still teach. I've been teaching. Part of our philosophy at Shaman and Kellenberg is every administrator teaches. Every administrator. So you have your finger in the pie all the time. You know what's going on.
So every teacher and every administrator at Kellenberg is teaching classes too.
Right.
So that there's none of this ivory tower kind of
no,
concept
that's right.
of, oh, we'll tell you how to teach.
Right.
You're engaged. What do you teach? What
I teach senior Latin, honors Latin.
Latin? Very
Yeah.
good.
And see, one of the things I want to tell you is that the American concept is they teach for the kid to recognize, not to master. See, master is work, it's memorization, it's dog work. Every so often I'll get a call, we get calls about May, incoming freshman, mother says, my son is advanced, he's in algebra. We said, okay, we'll give him a qualifying exam. But before that, get a pencil and paper, have your son do these 3 problems. Add 1/9 and 1/7, divide 352 by 6.8, and give me the decimal equivalents of 17% and 19%.
Can't do it.
I said, call me back tomorrow. Kids say, oh, that's a fraction. Can you do them? No. And fractions and decimals are very important math functions that you have to master. Functions.
Let me ask you about Kellenberg. Private education. Expensive?
Yeah. I mean, it's much cheaper than a public school. We're half the cost of a public school.
Well, I
Nassau
don't
County-
understand. They say Catholic school is expensive. Is it more expensive than public school?
No. It's a great bargain, but the parents have to pay the $22,000 that the public school costs plus the $10,000 that a private school costs.
So to educate a public school student, it costs $22,000. But the parent doesn't take out the checkbook and write the check. It comes out of their property taxes.
Correct. And that's why we have such high property taxes.
And then when you get to the private school, so in other words, what's happening is the Catholic school parent pays twice.
Twice.
Has to pay the 22 grand for the students who go to the private public school, even though their kid doesn't go. But actually, Catholic education is less expensive than public education.
Yeah, couldn't. That's right.
What of this, just we're coming into our last minute, just briefly, the concept of school choice. We're talking about should a Catholic school parent be able to take that portion of their property taxes that goes to public education and put it to private education, or even a portion of it? Do you see it
Absolutely.
happening?
I gradually, there's a bill up in Albany that is sort of opening the door. It's been fought for the past 70, 80 years. It's fought vigorously.
Who fights it? Who's against it?
Teachers' unions, you know, and non-Christian denominations are against it.
Father Eichner, unfortunately, I'm getting the high sign. We're wrapping up on this topic. I thank you very much for your dedication to educating our children. Thanks for joining us. You've tuned into another program with the American Family Association of New York. Any comments or questions, you can see our number and our contact information on the screen. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
If you were born after 1973, about 30% of your friends and relatives are missing. Since the Supreme Court approved legal abortions 30 years ago, nearly 1 of every 3 babies was aborted. That means 43 million U.S. children, teens, and young adults are missing. While we know how all of them disappeared, we will never know what they had to offer. Life. See what we've been missing.
Over the years, humanity has made terrible mistakes. People were treated as less than human, even killed, because they were a different skin color, because they were a different faith, because they were unplanned, unknown, and helpless. But over time, we are slowly learning that we are all God's children, created in His image, and to disregard the value of human life, whether through hate or indifference, is wrong. That all human creation, regardless of race, religion, abilities, or stage of human life, has an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, a right to love and be loved. As Americans, let's cherish the sanctity of life, because we know how it feels when others treat us as less than human.
I wish I had known. Nobody told me that 40 years of research and 28 medical studies have shown a significant link between abortion and breast cancer. I didn't know abortion could increase my risk of breast cancer by 50% or more. Now, I've got breast cancer and learned the abortion I had when I was 17 was a major risk factor. I want to let other women know, because I would give anything to have known. Whether you're pregnant or had an abortion, learn the facts today.
Welcome to the American Family Association Presents. Tonight we're going to discuss a topic of growing importance across the nation and in New York. That topic is school choice. We want to discuss how choice affects educational quality for all students and how it affects taxpayers. Many states are moving in the direction with tax credits or vouchers, but in New York State, Assembly Democrats have held up this legislation for more than 4 years. Who opposes school choice and why? Our guest is Frank Russo. Frank serves on the Executive Committee of Long Islanders for Educational Reform and has 7 children and 33 grandchildren. Our co-host tonight, my co-host, is Patty Knapp. Patty?
Thanks, Mike. Welcome, Frank. Why don't we start with just a basic definition of parental choice in education? What do we mean by that?
What do we mean by it? Well, it's the right of a parent, the fundamental right of a parent, to pick a school for his or her child. We're talking about grades K through grades 12. Obviously, in college, you get to pick your own college. But only the wealthy really have the right to pick a school today for their children to go to elementary school or high school. Why? Because low-income parents can't afford to pay the tuition at a private school, most of which are religious schools. 90% of our private schools are religious schools. And even though the tuition, which covers the cost, is only a fraction of the public school cost, less than half the public school cost, they don't have that money. They don't have it to pay because they've got to pay for it versus picking up free education for their kids in the government-run public school. So only the wealthy really have full parental choice. And the way we want to implement choice in education, giving parents this right, is through either scholarships, which are funded by donations from people to scholarship funds, or through tax credits, which give people who send their children to a non-public school a tax credit, a certain amount of money, a small amount of money, but that would help them pay the tuition. So that's what we're talking about, is tax credits or scholarships that would help low-income and a lot of middle-income parents pick the school that they want for their children. That's what we mean.
So instead of somebody just automatically sending their child to the nearest public school, they would, by the tax credit you mentioned, they'd be able to take that part of their property taxes that's allocated for education and put that amount towards a private school if they prefer.
Well, it's actually the tax credit would only be probably applicable towards their income taxes. So unless it's what's called a refundable tax credit, which then would enable the really low income who don't even pay too much in income taxes, they would get an amount returned to them if the state allows this, and we have problems in New York State because of what's called the Blaine Amendment, which is a historical amendment, 150 years old. Its history is based in anti-Catholicism. Won't go into that in this program, but the basic way would be a tax credit or a scholarship, and for many of the poor it would be scholarships funded by donations from people to funds where they get a tax credit back for the donation, and that money then goes from the wealthy to the poor and the middle income to pay for part of the tuition.
And is there any research on parents preferring a private school? We can assume that most people are aware that the private schools are doing better, but do we know from areas around the country that when people are given this opportunity, they do in fact prefer the private schools?
The biggest example of school choice occurred about 25 years ago in Milwaukee. It's a very interesting subject because the voucher bill, they had a voucher bill in Milwaukee where they actually do have the government funding education for children to go to a non-public school. They don't have the same problematic anti-Catholic Blaine Amendment that New York has. And what they did, they got the white Republican governor back in 1990, Tommy Thompson, a conservative, with a black liberal Democrat assemblywoman named Polly Williams, who got together, the two of them, left and right, black and white, liberal conservative, got together and they put through the first major voucher trial in the United States. It was opposed by the mayor of Milwaukee, John Norquist. He opposed it, but it passed the legislature. They enacted it. 1991, we saw it begin. And after about 4 years, when they saw that mostly minority children, black children, going to Catholic schools and Christian schools, they saw they were doing better than what they were doing in the public schools. And they were doing better at a much lower cost. So the parents were happy. The government started changing its view. 2 years after that, they noticed that the public schools in Milwaukee started to improve.
Competition.
Competition did it. The pressure on the public schools. They didn't want to see all the parents wanting to take their kids out and put them into these private Catholic Christian schools. So the public schools began to improve. Everyone won. The kids in the public school, the kids in the private schools, the poor especially benefited. John Norquist, the mayor for 16 years of Milwaukee from 1988 to 2004, did a complete turnabout. He admitted he came out gung-ho for school choice. And we now see him supporting the issue of school choice.
He couldn't disagree with the evidence.
That's right. And now Cleveland started it. That went to a major case before the U.S. Supreme Court, validating on the federal level that vouchers are not unconstitutional. It's only in those states with this bigoted anti-Catholic Blaine Amendment like New York, and which the legislature is afraid to tackle when they have these constitutional conventions. But Cleveland, Ohio has it. Washington, D.C. had school choice, what they call the Opportunity Scholarship Program, introduced in 2004, I think it was, by the Republican Congress, and then they passed in the Democratic Senate. It lasted for 4 years. The black parents they loved it. It was a random thing, so they had lotteries. They loved the program. And then, surprisingly, who stopped the D.C. Opportunity Scholarship Program? This is mind-boggling. The first black president, Barack Obama, comes in 2009. He stops the program for the poor black kids in D.C. I don't even think the black people in D.C. know this. It was stopped. He doesn't send his two daughters. His two daughters went to Sidwell's Academy, $60,000, I think, a year.